Montana Territory, 1883. The wind came down off the crazy mountains like it was hunting something, and by the time the sun slipped behind the peaks, the land turned cold and mean. Verity Prescott pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and looked out at the empty plains. She had not eaten since the morning 2 dry biscuits and a half cup of weak coffee, and now, with the dark closing in, her stomach pulled tight with hunger. The firewood was gone, her horse had died 3 days back, and the match tin held only one left. She stared at it in her palm. One match. One chance, but she had nothing to burn. A week ago, she had been trying to reach Bozeman. She had worked as a seamstress in Fort Benton, saved every coin, and bought passage on a freight wagon. Then bandits hit the trail near Judith Gap. They shot the driver, took the mules, and left her behind with a busted wheel and a cracked canteen. She had walked for miles, hoping for a passing rancher or scout. But no one came. Now she sat hungry in the dark, huddled near a cold ring of stones, too tired to cry, too hurt to pray. A sound broke through the wind, a horse, then hooves sliding on loose earth. She shot to her feet, heart thudding hard, hand on the small knife in her boot. Silhouette against the twilight, a tall figure dismounted and tied his horse to the nearest pine. "Easy," the man called out, voice calm. "I am not looking for trouble." She did not speak, too wary, too exhausted. He stepped closer, hands where she could see them. "Name's Vaughn Fletcher. I saw smoke earlier, figured someone might need help." "There was no smoke," she said, voice hoarse. "There is now," he said, and dropped a bundle of dry kindling near the stones. "You look like you could use a fire." She did not stop him, could not. He struck a match his own and coaxed flames to life. The warmth touched her face like a hand. "You got food?" he asked. She shook her head. Vaughn nodded once and turned to his saddlebag. He pulled out a tin of beans, a strip of salt pork, and a small sack of coffee grounds. "I will make us something," he said. "It will last all night." She sat back down, her bones aching with the weight of the past week. Vaughn set to work with quiet purpose, slicing the meat into a battered pan, letting it sizzle before adding beans and a pinch of something that smelled like sage. He did not ask questions. He did not look at her like she was broken. Just stirred the pot, poured coffee into a tin cup, and handed it to her. Verity took it with shaking hands. "Thank you," he nodded, eyes steady. "You got a name?" "Verity Prescott." "You out here alone?" "My wagon was taken." "I was left behind." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing cruel, nothing sharp. When the food was done, he handed her the first bowl. She ate slow, even though her body begged her to devour it. She would not look like some wild thing. She had lost her dignity once already, she would not lose it again. Vaughn ate beside her, silent. The fire crackled, casting gold light across his face. He could not have been much older than 30. His coat was worn but clean, his boots mended with care. There was something quiet about him. Not shy, just sure of himself. "I was heading west," she said after a while. "Bozeman, I had work waiting." He tipped his head. "Still do, maybe. Not now, not after this." "You are not dead," he said. "That counts for something." She looked at him. "You always talk like that." "No," he said. "Just when it matters." The wind howled once more, but the fire held strong. She pulled her shawl tighter, and Vaughn stood, shrugged out of his coat, and draped it over her shoulders before she could stop him. "I will keep watch," he said. "You sleep. I do not know you." He knelt beside his saddle, pistol within reach, eyes on the horizon. "You do not need to. I am not going to hurt you." She wanted to believe him. The food settled heavy and warm in her belly. Her body sagged under the coat, the fire, the strange safety of his presence. She lay down beside the flames, her head resting on folded arms. Before sleep took her, she whispered, "Thank you, Vaughn." He did not reply, but she caught the faintest smile in the firelight. When she woke, dawn was breaking over the hills. The fire was still warm. Vaughn was still there. "You stayed," she said, voice rough from sleep. "I said I would." Her stomach growled again, but softer this time. Vaughn handed her a piece of jerky and a tin of water. "We will ride for Bozeman," he said. "You can ride my horse, I will walk." "No, you will not make it on foot," he said simply. "And I am not leaving you behind." She tried to argue, but he had already packed his things. He helped her mount, tied his gear to the saddle, and started walking west without complaint. They traveled like that for 2 days. He hunted rabbits, made stew, told her about the ranch he used to work for near the Yellowstone River. She told him about her brother who died in the war, about her dream to open a dress shop. She laughed once, really laughed, and Vaughn looked over like he had not heard that sound in a long time. On the 3rd day, they reached Bozeman. He helped her down, hands gentle on her waist. She looked up at him, heart suddenly too close to her throat. "I do not know how to thank you," she said. "You already did." "I mean it." He looked at her, really looked. "You could let me see you again," she blinked. "What? I got a job offer south of here, small cattle outfit." "But if you are staying in town." "I am," she said quickly. He smiled, not wide, just enough to make her chest ache. "Then I will ride back when the work is done." She nodded, heart racing, and she knew deep down that he would. Vaughn didn't return in a week. He returned in 4. Verity had taken a room above the mercantile, paid for with coin she earned hemming sleeves and patching trousers for the men who worked the yards. It wasn't fine work, but her hands stayed busy, and her mind didn't wander so much. The 2nd-floor window overlooked Main Street, and each morning she'd glance down at the wagons and riders, wondering if one of them might be him. When he finally came through, it was just past supper, the sky bruised with the last light. He rode in slow, dust rising behind him, and tethered his horse outside the blacksmith's. She saw him from the window and stood still as stone until her heart caught up. He didn't look up. Just took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair, and stepped inside the smithy. The next morning she found him leaning against the hitch rail outside the dry goods store, arms crossed, hat low. His coat was different. Newer, maybe, or just cleaner. "You're late," she said. He looked over. "I made it. You find work?" "I did." He straightened. "Out at the Swan place." They needed a hand with winter calves and a new well dug. "That's near Gallatin." "Close enough to ride in when I have reason to." Verity didn't answer. A wagon rattled past them, 2 boys perched in back tossing pebbles at one another. "You still sewing upstairs?" he asked. "For now," he nodded once. "That what you want to keep doing?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I want a place of my own, shop front, maybe a corner window with good light. There's a room for lease across from the livery, but the rent's steep." His gaze settled on her face. "You got a plan?" "I've got a ledger, and I'm careful." He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his belt. "You'd make it work. I don't want to owe anyone. I didn't offer to front it, I know." She looked down at her hands. "I just wanted to say it out loud." They stood in silence for a moment. Then he said, "You want to walk a while?" She nodded, and they passed through the edge of town, boots crunching over frost-hardened weeds until the buildings gave way to open field. "I thought you might not come back," she said, eyes on the horizon. "I knew I would." She glanced at him. "You always that sure of things?" "No, just you." She stopped walking. Wind pushed against her skirt, cold and sharp. "You don't know me well enough to say that." He turned to face her. "Then let me." A hawk circled far off, its cry thin and distant. "You're quiet," she said finally. "Most men talk too much." "I talk when there's something worth saying." She studied him for a long moment. "I think I'd like to see your place." "Where you work? It's rough country." "I'm not afraid of rough," he nodded slowly. "Then maybe next week, once the calves are settled, you can see what it's like. I'll bring coffee. Real beans, not the sweepings." He smiled then, just enough to soften the line of his jaw. "That'd be fine." They walked back without speaking, not from awkwardness but from peace. At her door he tipped his hat and stepped back. "Verity?" "Yes. If I see that place across from the livery empty too long, I might be tempted to put your name on the window myself." She arched a brow. "You do? I'll charge you double for patching your shirts." He looked like he was about to say something else, then just gave a short nod and turned to go. She watched him until he vanished around the corner, heart steady in her chest for the first time in weeks. 3 weeks passed before Verity stepped down from the stagecoach outside the Swan Ranch, her boots crunching into thawing mud. The sun hung low behind the bare cottonwoods, lighting the valley gold. Vaughn was sawing fence planks with another hand near the smokehouse. He looked up once, then stopped altogether. "I told your foreman I'd only stay the weekend," Verity said as he approached, her bag looped over one shoulder. "I brought your shirts." "You keep tearing them." Vaughn didn't reach for the bag. "Thought you said you weren't in the habit of chasing men into the hills." "I'm not," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, "but I wanted to see what you do when you're not standing still." He motioned toward the house. "There's coffee on, stove's clean, you can sit if you like." She followed him across the yard, skirts lifting slightly above her boots. The house was small but tight, cedar framed with a porch just wide enough for 2 chairs. Inside, she set her bag down and took in the neatness tools hung straight on the wall, floor swept, a folded wool blanket across the cot. "You live tidy," she said. "I work better when things stay where I leave them." She poured herself a cup of coffee from the blue enamel pot and leaned against the table. "You always this direct, only with people who don't lie to me," Verity sipped once. "I brought ledger pages. I've been drawing up cost margins for the shop." His brow lifted. "You're close, closer than I was. I've lined up 3 commissions for spring, 2 rancher wives and a school teacher from down near Trail Creek. If I land one more before April, I can pay the first quarter outright." He leaned against the doorframe. "That's a lot to carry alone." "I've done harder things. I know you have." She looked down into her cup. "You ever think about settling?" He didn't answer right away. The wind shifted through the open window, stirring the curtain. "I used to think I'd put up a cabin near the big hole," he said. "Raise a few cattle, maybe try my hand at something steadier, but it didn't seem worth the trouble until now." Verity set the cup down, the porcelain clinking softly. "What changed?" "You showed up hungry in the dark," he said, voice low. "And I stopped thinking about leaving things behind." She didn't speak for a moment, only watched him. Then she stepped closer, slowly, as if testing the floorboards. "I don't know what I'm supposed to want," she said. "I had plans once, but they all went quiet after the war took my brother. After that, I just kept moving." "I ain't here to stop you," he said, "but I wouldn't mind being the place you come back to." She reached out and touched the edge of his sleeve. "That's not a small thing to say." "I don't say small things." Outside, a horse stamped its hooves. The sun dropped a little lower behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the room. "I want to see the calves," Verity said. "And the well you dug, you planning on writing up a full report?" "I just want to know the pieces of your life," he nodded once. "Then I'll show you." They walked the pasture in silence, her arm tucked against his. The calves bleated soft from the far pen, their mothers grazing nearby. Vaughn explained how they'd had to dig twice before they hit good water, how the frost had hardened the soil and cracked one of the tools. "Why'd you stay on here?" Verity asked. "Because the land listens," he said, "and the work holds." When they returned to the house, she didn't go back to town. Not that night. Vaughn lit the stove again, warmed the rest of the beans he had cooked earlier. She sat at the table, her hands resting on the linen bag beside her, and watched him move across the room. "You remember that night," she said. "I remember all of it. I thought I might die out there. And I thought maybe I'd finally met someone who wouldn't leave come morning." She stood, slow and sure, and stepped closer. Her voice dropped soft. "You were right." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers rough against her own. She didn't pull away. "You stay as long as you like," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied. And in the quiet that followed, the wind outside softened and the fire in the stove burned steady. By early May, the last of the snow had gone soft and sun-starved, leaving the Swan Ranch fields patchy with green. Verity stayed on through the thaw, not by plan but by rhythm, each day folding into the next until the idea of leaving began to feel like something she'd imagined once but no longer believed in. She moved into the spare room off the kitchen, the one Vaughn had built himself the winter before last. She didn't ask to stay, and he didn't offer in words. He had simply set her sewing bundle on the cot one evening and hooked a curtain across the doorway before heading back outside to oil the hinges on the barn gate. The days came early. She rose with the hens, tied her hair back with the blue calico ribbon she'd saved from a dry goods order, and kept her hands busy mending gear, boiling starch for collars, brushing down Vaughn's horse before he rode fence. He never asked her to. She never waited for permission. One morning, as she knelt by the garden bed near the well, Vaughn returned from the ridge with a splintered boot heel and a flush across his cheekbone from where a branch had caught him. She stood when she saw him, brushing dirt from her palms. "You got into something," she said. Cedar's snag gave way. Horse didn't like it much. "Let me see your face." He tilted his head down, letting her fingers trace the angry scrape across his cheek. She didn't flinch and he didn't pull away. "You're lucky it missed your eye," she said. "I've been lucky in worse ways." She looked up at him, her thumb still at the edge of the scrape. "You always this reckless when you're alone," he gave a soft chuckle. "I was worse." That night after supper, she sat by the window with her ledger open across her knees. The light from the oil lamp caught in the curve of her jaw as she worked numbers in pencil, pausing now and then to check a folded scrap of parchment tucked into the back. Vaughn watched from the other chair, polishing the handle of his saddle with a rag in quiet focus. "You planning to stay through summer?" he asked, not looking up. "I was thinking I might," she said, "but not as a guest." "What do you mean?" "I spoke with Mrs. Calhoun down in Bozeman. Her husband's setting up a shipping route for wool and hides. She offered to sublet the front of her shop for commission work. I'd keep the books and take orders while she handles the freight paperwork." Vaughn set the rag down. "You'd live in town again." "Only a few days a week. The rest I'd be here." "If that's something you want." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I built this place for quiet, but it's better with your boots in the entryway." Verity closed the ledger. "Then we keep both quiet and work. You still want your own shop." "I think I want a life more than I want walls with my name on them." He stood and crossed the room, kneeling beside her chair. "I don't know how to be the kind of man who says things pretty. I never asked you to, but I know what it is to miss a thing before it's gone, and I'd rather not miss you." She reached out and touched the edge of his shirt collar, her fingers rough from thread and sun. "Then don't." Outside, the cattle lowed once, and somewhere in the dark, a meadowlark began a thin, tremulous song. Vaughn set his hand over hers. "I want you here," he said. "Then that's settled." And it was. She stayed through the summer. The garden grew thick with squash and bush beans. She took the sublet and rode into town twice a week, returning each Thursday with news, letters, and sometimes a basket of sweetbread the Calhouns insisted on sending. They built a new shed together in July, her in a broad hat and him with sawdust in his hair. She laughed once when he dropped a board on his foot, and he kissed her for the first time right there, with her laughing against his mouth and his hands still dusty. By harvest, they were planning a second room, one with a real bed and space enough for both their boots. She didn't write her name on a shop window. She didn't need to. Her name was in the field, in the firewood pile, in the shirts she patched when the fence line fought back. And every night, after the lamps went low and the wind moved past the porch like a hand through grass, she curled against him beneath the quilt and rested easy, knowing she would never be hungry in the dark again. By mid-October, the cottonwoods had turned ochre and brittle, their leaves falling in slow spirals across the pasture as if reluctant to let go. The air smelled of dry grass and smoke from the chimney, and the mornings came with a hush that soaked into the boards of the porch. Verity stood barefoot in the doorway, her hem brushing her ankles, watching a hawk circle above the slope beyond the barn. Vaughn was at the forge out back, straightening a hinge pin using a coal bed and a hammered rhythm that had become part of the landscape these past months. "You'll bend it too far if you rush it," she called over her shoulder, not turning. "I've got a feel for it. You said that yesterday, and we're still short a gate latch." He didn't answer with words, only let the hammer fall again, measured and even. She stepped down into the yard, the grass cold under her soles, and walked toward the pen where they'd moved the last of the calves. The fence was holding, though one post leaned slightly from where a yearling had tested its strength 2 nights before. She noted it with a nod and moved on to the shed. Inside, bolts of wool and calico were stacked in a crate she'd salvaged from the cowhound's shipping yard. She ran her fingers over the fabric, already sorting commissions in her mind. Mrs. Thorne's riding skirt, the Dunley girl's wedding blouse, that quiet-eyed widow from Willow Creek who'd asked for something plain and blue for church. She had work enough to last through the snow. That evening, as they sat on the porch sharing the last of the cornbread, Vaughn passed her a folded sheet of paper. She took it without a word, unfolded it, and stared at the handwriting blocky, careful the ink pressed deep into the paper. "You wrote to them," she said. "You said you wouldn't ask. I didn't. But I know you wanted to." She traced the lines with her thumb. It was a letter from a lawyer in Helena, confirmation of a deed transfer, her brother's claim outside Fort Benton, long thought forfeited. Vaughn had tracked it through a cattle broker who owed him a favor. The land was no longer hers, but the letter detailed the sale and the sum held in escrow, waiting to be claimed. "I didn't know if you'd want it," he said. "But I figured it ought to be yours to decide. I thought it was gone, so did I, but some things don't go easy." She set the letter down on her lap. "I could buy the shop outright with this, you could, or lumber for that second room we talked about." He didn't move. "That too." She turned to face him, the porch light catching in her eyes. "You didn't have to do this. I know. I didn't expect it. I know that too." She leaned in slowly, resting her hand on his where it lay across his knee. "You always make space for me. Even when I don't ask. I don't ever want you to feel like you have to ask." She kissed him then, soft and deliberate, like a promise sealed rather than spoken. His hand came up to her back, steady and warm, and the last of the cornbread fell forgotten beside them. They married in late November, in the stone chapel west of Bozeman, with the preacher's wife singing hymns while the wind rattled the shutters. Verity wore a dress she stitched herself from a bolt of dove gray cotton, and Vaughn stood beside her in his best coat, collar stiff and hands sure. Afterward, they returned to the ranch, where the Dunley girl had left a basket of sugared apples, and Mrs. Thorne had sent a quilt with their initials stitched in one corner. Snow dusted the fence posts, and the fire in the hearth threw shadows long across the floor. That night, Verity sat cross-legged on the rug, sorting letters from her town clients while Vaughn added another log to the fire. The silence between them was easy, the kind that came not from absence but from knowing. "You think we'll ever leave this place?" she asked. He considered it. "Only if it stops holding." "It won't," she said. "I feel it in my bones." He came to sit beside her, one hand on her knee. "Then we stay." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they watched the flames together until the wind outside quieted and the house settled deep into its foundation. Years passed, and the ranch grew with them. They built the second room, then a third. She opened her own shop front finally, not in Bozeman but in the valley itself, just a small room off the porch with bolts of cloth and a wide table for cutting. Women came from as far as Annie's for her work, and she never once missed a delivery. Vaughn took on two younger hands from the valley, taught them how to listen to the land and to leave things better than they found them. He never raised his voice, and they followed him like hounds at heel. They grew old with the seasons, not fast but sure. Spring brought lambs and the first green shoots. Summer brought dust and long days. Autumn brought the smell of apples and the ache in their knees. Winter brought silence, and together they filled it. And when the years finally began to slow them, when the porch steps grew harder to climb and the fence lines began to lean again, they sat together each evening with her hand in his and their boots side by side. Love had come not with thunder, but with steady ground. And it stayed because they built it that way, quiet, rooted and true.